mental health is actually fairly different right now. We're living in a different society. There are a fair number of strains. The pace of change is tremendous. We're more isolated than we were before. Like, we can't just wait for somebody to have an issue and then respond to it. Like, that sort of never did make sense, but that's where it was before. We really need to build mental health into the systems, our supports, the things that build resilience, getting rid of the stigma that you had mentioned before, integrating that into schools, integrating that into workplaces, integrating that into society.
Paula, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Good to be here.
Nice to see you again. I can't believe we waited so long. Like, we spoke last year and here we are now. So nice to find. What have you been up to?
Oh gosh, I don't even know. Actually, time has gone by so quickly. It's I don't know. I've been eating, I've been drinking, I've been sleeping, I've been seeing friends.
The basics. Doing the basics. Doing the basics. Yeah. In all seriousness, tell everyone a little bit more about yourself personally and your journey to the role you're in now, and also a little bit about the role, because you have a very unique, interesting role, which I want to elaborate on.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. I think I'm very fortunate. I've had a varied background. So I started off as a clinician. I actually intended to work with children for my entire career. When I was doing so, I loved doing so. But as the universe takes us in different places, sometimes I started working in the corporate environment and really saw some interesting things. Remember, this was like several years ago, and I was appalled. I was absolutely appalled. Because I worked with people who were going on disability. So I saw how people were excluded, they were left on their own, they were vilified in some situations, very little help, support, or anything that we would have done in my life with children was translating into how we dealt with adults. So I became a bit of a crusader and had the opportunity to do so. Worked in an organization where we revamped how we manage disability and have been going upstream ever since. So consulting, manager training, basic product development, but always had a research focus, and that's where I'm focused exclusively now. So worked with some data scientists, worked with some researchers, and what we do is we look at where health is going, particularly in the workplace population, and focus a lot on mental health and what does and does not work. So it's really an interesting area for me, and hopefully I can share some of the findings that we have.
Yeah. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit about TELUS Health if they're not aware of it as well?
Yeah, well, TELUS Health is also a bit of a crusading organization. Our CEO, Darren Entwistle, we had a very, very successful business in telecommunications, but a very strong social purpose. And when we were looking to branch off into different areas, two big areas came up, addressing food and addressing health. So there's actually a TELUS agriculture business.
Really?
And I'm in TELUS Health. Yeah, there is.
I did not know that whatsoever. And I know a lot about it. I had no idea. Okay, that's so interesting. Wow.
Yeah, well, it looks at really the food chain, because when you think about it, you're never going to have a good quality of life unless food is more accessible, it's safe, it's sustainably created. So we have a business that actually focuses very specifically on using technology and really good thinking in terms of making that happen. And same for health. I mean, we're in 160 different countries. We have a very, very strong presence in mental health because there is no health without mental health. Mm-hmm. But we also focus on other areas, all the things that really make a difference. Physician support, pharmacy, all of that. Disability management, we're still in that business, making a difference. And, very proud to be part of the company and really kind of raising the boat, not just accepting and dealing with the way things are, but making people healthier. And when they're not healthy, helping them get back to health as quickly as possible.
Amazing. From our last conversation, mental health is close to my heart as someone who struggles continuously, even to this day. And I suffered in silence for 15 years, sort of hiding it from everyone and constantly having panic attacks thinking I'm having a heart attack, because I had no idea what was happening to me, and not being being afraid to share and be vulnerable along that journey. And I know something you said that from our last conversation, you said that when it comes to mental health support for employees, it needs to look different now than it did before. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. Before, it was very reactive. Somebody had a mental health issue and you wanted to make sure that they had benefits and supports to sort of deal with whatever the crisis is, and, sort of patch people up. And, we still need reactive services, but our mental health is actually fairly different right now. We're living in a different society. There are a fair number of strains. The pace of change is tremendous. We're more isolated than we were before. Like, we can't just wait for somebody to have an issue and then respond to it. Like, that sort of never did make sense, but that's where it was before. We really need to build mental health into the systems, our supports, the things that build resilience, getting rid of the stigma that you had mentioned before, integrating that into schools, integrating that into workplaces, integrating that into society. Because if we don't, we're really going to be in a bit of a bad place, because there are more mental health challenges now than there were before, for very good reasons. And we just can't accept that, especially when it's not necessary. We can do things to change it.
Yeah. It's so great that it's starting to also show up in schools, like you mentioned. I did a little video with my 5-year-old daughter. We did a little podcast the other day because she was like, "You promised you'd do a podcast with me," and it's got like 25,000 views on LinkedIn. And she said to me, I asked her, what she's been up to, and she was like, "We learned about loneliness in school last week." Oh,
great.
And she was like, I was like, "How do you know?" And she mentioned one of her friends, and I was like, "How did you know she was lonely?" And she's like, "Because we learn about loneliness, so I could recognize it because she was sad, and this is what I did to help her." And I'm like, "You're 5, and you're already, that a lot of our leaders can learn from listening to something like that right now, as well." So I was really happy to hear her say, I had no idea that she was learning about those things at school, and some of our younger individuals are facing very specific additional risks. Can you talk about those as well?
Yeah, well, loneliness is one of them, actually. I mean, actually, let me just take a bit of a step back. The World Health Organization came out with a really strong communication, as well as the intent to develop a forum to deal with loneliness as a health issue. It's a global health issue. And a lot of people say, well, was it caused by the pandemic? Well, no, we had been actually trending this way for quite some time. Pandemic made it a little bit worse, sort of accelerated that negative trend. But as we sort of, as we moved in society to enable people to be by themselves, enable them to sort of, live, work, eat, play, be very, very effective in many sort of basic areas without other people. Like, we're not building barns together as much as we used to. We allowed ourselves to get into this sort of, place where we were moving, in very small increments towards being isolated. The other thing is, if you really kind of look at what we value as a society, we actually started to value being by ourselves and being isolated a little bit more. And by that, I mean, when you go into an airplane, the ones that you pay the most money for, the seats that you pay the most money for, are the isolated ones. If you're in a high-end condo, what's the big feature of a high-end condo? A private elevator that you don't have to see anybody else. There's articles around, you can live in New York City your entire life, and if you have a certain income, you don't necessarily need to even see another person, or you have a small group of people. So, we have been just going this way as a society. Mm-hmm. Problem is, when you're born into, like, we change so quickly, and the pace of change is happening so much. The world that you and I are born into is different than the world that our parents were born into, is different than the world that your children are born into. And it has been impacting us negatively. So staying with the isolation, when we have social support, when we have connections, when we have that sense of belonging, when it is really just a part of our experience in every area of life and everything that we do, our stress goes down. Our stress goes down. We feel that we can cope with things more easily when we are part of a group. When we are isolated, even if there isn't any undue stress, just because of the way human beings are built, we're more on edge.
Yeah.
So we've been finding this in society a fair bit. So isolation, rapid pace of change, there's a number of things that have impacted younger cohorts a lot more than the cohorts before. And we're seeing it show up in higher mental health risk.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a correlation, but I've seen it happen with a couple of my personal friends who are living at home, obviously surrounded by family, and have moved out on their own. Mm-hmm. And have then become very isolated and then suffer from loneliness. And because when they go to work all day, they go home to no one. They're there, they used to, their whole life they were around the family, in that environment. And I've seen it happen with quite a few different friends that they were so excited to move out on their own early on, and now they're kind of coming home to just a silent, just no social interaction whatsoever. And especially if then you're stressed on top of that, like you said, or you're anxious, and now you're completely isolated. I'm seeing that have a significant impact on some of my friends at the moment.
And more people are living alone now than ever before. Like it was fairly rare at one point, but now we have more of the population in North America living alone than living with other people. So, that is someone's, choice or circumstance. But the thing that's non-negotiable is whatever your personal situation is, you still need those connections with other human beings. You can't really get away from it. Like you can't rewire the human brain to say that this is okay. And we've been trying, and it's been failing. The other thing is that it's important to work as well. Because when you think about it, people often think, well, work is this thing that's separate over here. Well, no, it's a part of your life. The time, the hours, the experiences that you have make who you are. So we underestimate those connections. And it's not just about office workers going back to the office. The core thing is trust. Because people can have a lot of social interactions. But if those interactions aren't trusted interactions, people who have your back and you'll get that social support from, people who you can be yourself with, people who you feel a sense of belonging when you're with them, then those social interactions mean absolutely nothing. Maybe I shouldn't say nothing. It might be window dressing and change of scenery or whatever, just to be with another person, but it certainly doesn't address the issue of loneliness.
Yeah. One of the challenges I'm hearing from chief HR officers every day is they're struggling to create that sense of belonging in a hybrid distributed work environment. Love to hear. I'm sure that's something you and the team have looked into.
Yeah, I would say start with focusing on a sense of trust. And that sense of belonging comes, as a result of that. Like when you think about it, there's certain things that actually build trust. Like one of the things that builds trust is when you trust other people. When somebody, well, actually, let me put it another way to make the point. Have you ever trusted someone who made it clear that they don't trust you?
Yeah.
Never. No. So, it is sort of important to show that trust, give people stress responsibilities, give them, that freedom and a sense of control over what they do, ask opinions. Communication is really important. If you are with somebody, but you're not communicating openly, you're not communicating broadly, you're not communicating, like even frequency makes a difference. There's some research that says that there's more trust between managers and employees when they communicate daily. And, daily might not be possible, but frequently and truly is daily all that impossible. It doesn't have to be a long conversation, just a connection.
Yeah.
And support. that's the other thing that's important. People need to feel safe and they need to feel supported. So allowing people to sort of be who they are, say what they need to say. And when things get difficult, whether it's from a work point of view or a non-work point of view, you be there. You just don't abandon. You just don't, turn on people when things are difficult. So when you have that sense of trust, that sense of belonging, it really comes much more easily.
Yeah, it has to go hand in hand. You can't have that. Never really thought about that. What would you say a common misconception is when it comes to belonging that you kind of come across, that you hear?
I think the biggest misconception around belonging is that it can be physical. You know what I mean? You include people in conversations, for example, but if you don't listen to what they have to say, then you don't really get that sense of belonging. So that would be what I call sort of a physical thing, but you're not really getting at the emotional part of it. You have big events and everybody is invited to these events, but there's not really any kind of connection and trust to sort of make that event feel great. People end up trying to avoid it because it's just noise in their life as opposed to something that feeds them, which connection should. So I keep going back to, belonging is around trust. The other part of belonging is around respect. And I call that out, even though it's part of trust, because you need that. Like if you're a part of a group and you don't feel respected, then you're really not part of that group, or you won't want to be. So
yeah. I'm sure everyone listening, including me, was just thinking back to moments where I felt like that, like where you're invited to a meeting, but you don't feel like you belong there, right? Yeah. Or you're invited to, there was a leadership retreat in a previous company I worked on that I was invited, but I didn't feel like I belong, and I didn't want to be there. But they would say, well, we invited Chris, so what do you mean he doesn't feel like he belongs, right? To your point. So that's a really, really interesting perspective. And so you, at the same time, and I've learned that in our virtual meetings, I have to make a conscious effort to make sure everyone's fully included and heard. Otherwise you have the extroverts just just running the whole meeting, right? And also they may not want to give me that feedback in that environment either. They may want to message me, right? And not have to show up. That's also something people have to be aware of. Not everyone wants to be in that group environment and give their feedback and be vulnerable in a group setting either. So that's something I've had to learn, to kind of meet people where they're at. If that makes sense.
Well, you said exactly when you said meet people where they're at. That's kind of an important thing as well. So I just want to amplify it, because when people feel included, right, which is sort of it's aligned with a sense of belonging, they feel that they can be who they are, right? So just in social environments, obviously you don't have carte blanche rule to be rude to other people or damage other people, but within that, taking that aside, there's a lot of range of behaviors and things of that sort. So just as sort of an example, even what you're doing right now, Chris, is very helpful to me and makes me feel a good sense of connection and like I belong in this podcast. Because if you notice, I move around a lot, and not everybody does. Not everybody does, particularly in this video environment. And you could have said, "Okay, stop." Paula, don't move. Okay, you have to be this because that's the way it has to be. But Paula,
now you said it. I know. I'm only joking. I'm playing.
That would have been pretty. That would have made me feel pretty excluded from any kind of sense of connection with you. It just put me in a place of anxiety that it was likely unnecessary. And we do this, a lot, in certain situations. I remember as a younger employee, I attended a dinner banquet and was absolutely terrified because I wasn't sure that I was behaving in the right way. Like you had to watch, what fork do I stand now? Do I do this or whatever? Because it was not like, oh, it's okay. We normally do this, but it doesn't matter if you do. I got the message pretty clear that I better understand the rules, or I would be amplified as an outsider. That's not fun.
Yeah, I've been there. And I've been there exactly in that same environment where I went to a banquet and there was like 7 different forks. I was like, what am I doing? Well, I don't know where, outside in, inside out. What do I do? No. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is the pandemic was kind of a reset for a lot of people's collective mental health, and many people, it shone a spotlight, kind of one of the silver linings of the pandemic is a lot more conversations started to come up about mental health because there was becoming more of an issue. We launched a global summit called Ripple, where we brought together 3,000 heads of wellbeing to address this challenge, and it's been part of our ongoing work. But sort of, what's the next big impact that you think will change mental health and something that we need to look out for?
Oh, okay. Well, I might give you a riddle, but I won't torture you that way. But when you hear about, when you're in business conversations, it's hard to get through a business conversation without hearing about AI. And the reality of the situation is that it will have no small impact on us as a society, and therefore on our mental health. And where we are in this AI journey is right at the very beginning. I mean, we're seeing, changes, we're seeing opportunities. It really hasn't taken off in the exponential manner that we expected to very soon. So that'll affect us in a couple of ways. There will be a lot of things that are good that come from this. And on balance, I think it will be good. But the pace of change just by itself will make it more difficult for us. Like when you need a little bit of change, you need a little bit of stimulation, you need to have that. It actually helps build new neural pathways and helps you build a sense of resilience when you have that kind of challenge and stimulation, and you move through, you learn, you adapt, you go forward. But when it's overwhelming, when you feel that you don't have the social support that we talked about because you're isolated, when the pace is just a little bit too fast and you don't have the skills to deal with that new pace, you can get overwhelmed pretty quickly. And, usually that shows up as anxiety. So I think we have to watch that. I think we have to work very hard on those social connections, because again, that's the balance. But we also have to start building some skills around how to absorb information quickly, adapt to it, not fear. Like it's the type of thing that comes up in cognitive behavioral therapy, but I really think it needs to be integrated into the schools and the systems that we have right now, because it is definitely a risk.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is going to be the next big wave that's going to change our mental health scores, unless we're more active to make sure that it doesn't happen.
So it's really not so much the tool itself as us adapting to the impact it's having on us. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah. Exactly, but there are things like there are unintended consequences for virtually everything, right?
That's true.
So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we have to pay attention to that. I think one of our learnings is social media. I mean, there's a lot that's good about social media. Like for example, I feel great about being able to connect with people that I otherwise wouldn't be able to keep in touch with, and building those relationships, even because they're not possible to be face to face. It gives me the next best thing. So I don't want to get rid of that. But there are some unintended consequences as well. There's, the barrage of information that might not be helpful for our self-esteem. There's the impact in terms of taking people away from actual personal relationships and putting them in the social media sphere as a preference. So I think if we were a little bit smarter, we would have balanced for that a little bit earlier and amplified the things that are good and prepared people for the things that are a little bit more concerning.
Yeah.
Same thing with this AI. We have to be a little bit mindful and think about the potential impact of, just even talking and I say talking to an artificial intelligence chatbot. And, does that become more comfortable than speaking with people?
Well, there's been research about that, right? There was a well-being at work report that one of our partners sent over, and they did a survey to employees and asked them that question. And, people came back saying, I would actually be more comfortable speaking with an AI about my mental health than my own manager. It was pretty shocking when I first read that most people would rather talk to a bot than their own manager about their mental health.
So think about that. There's a good part, and then there's a not so good part. The good part, and I believe this absolutely is probably going to be more than good, it's going to be great, is that we know that there is this feeling that there's less stigma when speaking to an inanimate being. Yeah, I don't know if inanimate's the right word, but let's go with that for a second.
Yeah.
So there's less stigma. We have a lot of people who have intense social phobia. Sometimes it's very intense, sometimes it's not as intense, but it's impacting their lives. So the ability to communicate and even sort of just develop communication and interpersonal skills, that's great. And if the bot itself has sort of, clinical programming and can appropriately move people, encourage people, reinforce them into broadening their social horizons, that's really great. That's a huge advance over what we have right now. The thing that we have to manage for is more comfortable speaking to AI, but what does that comfort mean? Because there is no ego in AI. So, at a certain point, I realize I don't have to say please and thank you. At a certain point, I can become very aggressive at a certain point. So, the AI has to be programmed to set some boundaries as well, or else we're reinforcing that kind of incivility that might slip into human contact. So this is what I mean about so many good things, but we have to be really seriously mindful of the things that could potentially not be good and manage for those.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, because AI also allows us to offer that at scale as well. As you said, it can signpost people a lot quicker. People can get access to information quicker rather than waiting for a human to come back to them. I think now, with large action models, it can now take an action for you. So you can actually ask the AI to go and actually take a action as well. So it's going to be incredible the way that people are going to be able to access that. My first experience with therapy was like in the middle ground between, I didn't want to see someone in person because I felt overwhelmed at the idea of going to see someone face to face. I didn't want to talk to a chatbot. So I ended up having a Zoom call with a therapist. so it was like a middle ground in the middle for me. I felt safe because I was in my house, in my safe environment, in my comfort zone. But at the same time, that person wasn't in the room with me, and and I felt virtual, and I felt like a little bit, more in control of the conversation, or just sort of the environment as well. So it's kind of strange, like you got those two ends, and I was like in the middle, and that was really helpful for me because most of it was all about just around the fear of actually going to see someone, I've got to go travel to this person I've never met, and now I've got to tell them all those things that I've never wanted to tell anyone, let alone a stranger. And that was really a game changer for me.
Well, one of the things I'm looking forward to with more scaled AI as well is really a focus on the things that build equity in health.
Yeah.
And, there's many things. I mean, people talk about bias in AI, and that's a big issue. But I mean, if you're aware of it, then you can actually balance for that. But a lot of people, you didn't feel comfortable. A lot of people just can't. You have young children at home. You're in a remote area, you have a unique need, or your cultural background is such that you just are, in person with the person that you need to be communicating with to get the right therapy for you is just not possible or practical. So, one of the great things that came out of the pandemic is that virtual therapy, the one that you were speaking about, has become much more common. And I see that definitely continuing.
Yeah, definitely. It's just an easier barrier to entry to be able to do that. What are some of the things that we can all do now to start to be more mindful and take care of our own mental health? What are some practical things that we can do?
I think there's some pretty basic things. I put them into sort of four big buckets. One is definitely really understanding how important that social connection is, that social support is. And, some people are fortunate to have people around them, other people are not. But there's many ways that we can get that if we're not. There's volunteer work, there's reaching out to others just to showing that you care about them, because then you have that reciprocation. There's being even just a little bit more patient in relationships, because I think a lot of us, just have lost a lot of patience, just generally speaking, so we don't allow ourselves to get to the point of trust. And the reason why I say it's important for us to understand how important it is that loneliness isn't just something that doesn't feel good. It triggers the same parts of the brain as physical pain. It's really not good. It puts so much strain on our bodies that we're more likely to have cardiovascular health issues, stroke, immune system disorders. It's really something that if you're responsibly taking care of your health and well-being, you cannot ignore. So that's sort of the one thing, that social connection. The other thing that I would say is just be aware of your brain as part of your body, and how you take care of your body is important. So nutrition is something that we often forget is something that impacts your brain. Like if you're not getting that wide variety of foods, if you're overweighting on things that aren't healthy for your heart, you're also, sapping some of your personal resilience capacity as well. And again, if you don't believe me, take a look and spend some time with me when I'm hungry, right? Like just a little bit of being off and not getting my patience is down, my resilience is down, my interpersonal skills are down. Like it's really just the foundation of us being able to, deal with the ups and downs of adrenaline in our lives.
Yeah.
The third thing is, really pay attention to how you respond to things. Our research has said that people have become a lot more sensitive to stress since the pandemic. So, that ongoing strain that we had for quite some time, the isolation that we had, it actually impacted us. So we're more sensitive to stress. We're more likely to lash out. Mm-hmm. And, nobody can tell you, I certainly can't tell you to feel something different. But how you respond, you have a lot of control over. So let's just say something makes you angry. You could be angry and you could take it out on everybody around you. You could push away other people. You could isolate yourself. You could do things that are destructive, or you could realize that most anger is about frustration. Mm. And then you could feel what frustrated you, what didn't go your way, what can you do about it? How could I collaborate and bring other people into my circle to sort of figure this out? You're going to go down two very different paths.
Yeah.
So, and the only last thing that I would say is just open your world a little bit. I think some of us forget that, we need a wide range of stimulation in order to be healthy, just like your body needs a wide range of movement. If you're always in a rut, you do the same thing every day, you see the same people every day, yeah. You travel the same route every day. You're not giving your brain a chance to really be what it needs to be, which is having that ongoing stimulation, building those new neural pathways, and doing so in a way that you don't feel overwhelmed because you're in control. So those are the 4 things that I would say. So there are other things you can do, meditation, a whole bunch of other things, counseling, but I would say those are 4 basics.
What are some of the things that you do personally that really work for you?
Well, I have an advantage because I do this research. So those 4 things that I know about, I try to incorporate.
There's one thing knowing it. There's one thing knowing. There's one thing knowing it, and there's another thing incorporating it, right? So
is that ever true? But I keep on saying, oh, it would be pretty bad if I didn't at least try. One of the things, and I do need to sort of go back to that. I exercise, but when I was dancing, that I think was my best stress relief, because
I'm with you, by the way.
You cannot, like, what is it? You have to, the type of dancing I did was very social. You're moving your body. There's a sense of accomplishment. It was just fun. And you can't think of anything else, or else you fall down. So it was good for me. Other things might be good for other people, but that was really outstanding for me.
Did we speak to that last time we spoke?
We might have.
I grew up in, I used to be a professional dancer. Right. So
no, we didn't speak about this, because I would have remembered that. That's tremendous.
So I was a break dancer, and went on tour with artists, and that was my first sort of career. And it started from I grew up in East London, super multicultural, so hip hop was obviously a big part of my upbringing. But honestly, the main reason I really got into dancing is that there was a lot of drugs, alcohol, domestic violence in my house, and so it was a really traumatic upbringing, which also is part of the reason I'm dealing with that now from my anxiety, which I didn't even realize as well. And dance for me was always my escape. And people would be like, "Chris, you're always dancing, like you never stop." And I'm like, because like you said, you can't dance and be stressed. Like you can't. I mean, for me, it was the one moment where I forgot about the world, I forgot about the stress, I forgot about the fact that all the crazy things that were happening, and I escaped into a different world, and so you just brought that up for me, and I missed that. I actually had some of my old friends who are still dancers. A couple of them are head of creatives for Cirque du Soleil, and others choreographed the opening ceremonies of the last couple of Olympics. They've gone on to do really, really, really well. But we're starting a new show, which we're going to live stream into this TV studio, where we basically once a month bring together dancers from all over the world, and we're going to live stream it into the studio, where kind of create like do you ever seen the YouTube channel Boiler Room, where the DJs do like, no, so they do like they'll get like the best DJs in the world to do like a live set, and they'll live stream it to YouTube, and even though you're at home, you're kind of listening to a live set, you feel like you're at the event, but you're not, right? We're doing the same thing for dance, so we want to kind of bring the dancers together, create a really cool environment, live stream it to all the platforms over the world, and people feel like they're part of this big dance event. And it was something that revisited my childhood. Really random side topic of this podcast, but you are right. Like for me, that was always my moment of escape, and I've lost that actually. I need to get that back, because I don't have a version of that apart from gym. Gym is working out, but dance there's a different level of escapism from compared to running or gym. I maybe like that gives me 50% of the way there, but dance I'm like fully immersed. So people need to find what works for them. And for my co-founder, he is doing long distance running. He'll go out and do like a 20K, and he'll come back and he's like, "I've solved our problem." Right? So I'm like, no, I'm not doing it on a Sunday. You can go and do that yourself. So it's different for different people, right? But it's just funny that you mentioned dance, because no one's ever said that to me before. And you said that as well. What about what would be your advice on how to approach someone that you can see who's struggling? Because there's people we see around us that are struggling, and it's sometimes really hard to approach that conversation. I'm actually going through that right now with a couple of friends, and they're not receiving, and they're blocking us out. They're becoming more isolated. what advice would you give on when it comes to that?
Yeah, you'll hardly ever go wrong with anything if you're honest, kind, and patient. Because I think the first thing around being honest is many of us will see people struggling. It doesn't sound like you are doing this, but many of us will see people struggling. And because it feels very uncomfortable for us to figure out what to do, we try to do nothing, or we ignore, or we just we don't step in, and that's not honest. And when you do, the most important thing, the best possible thing that you can do for another human being ever, but particularly if they're struggling, is to show that you care. You don't have to diagnose, you don't have to solve the problem, you don't have to. It's a little sometimes disrespectful to say, well, why don't you do this, that, and the other, because that might minimize something that's been building in their life and quite complex for several years. But if they know that you care and that you can be very specific about what you're seeing and why it's concerning you, and that's part of the honesty as well, you can be very helpful. Because it helps people, number one, feel connected to you, which is the base of everything. If you know another human being cares, that wraps around the world twice and is necessary in any kind of positive next step.
Yeah.
And if you're specific, then you're not judgy. If you say, you used to do this and now you do this and I'm concerned, or you've been doing X and I'm worried that's going to harm you, and that's why I'm concerned. It's a very different conversation than I think you're becoming a drug addict, or I think you're depressed. You're judging people, you're making an assumption, you're not basing it on something that you see, and you probably don't have any right to do that because you're not really a clinician. So that just clarity, this is what I see, showing people that you care about them. And the last point around patience is that it might take a couple of times before there's any sort of response. And it's not about you and getting a response. It's about them and their comfort in taking any kind of next step, which could include just talking to you and not yelling at you.
Yeah. No, I love that. That advice you just shared there, I think, is going to help so many people as well, because you're right. There's a couple of approaches people take. One, they just ignore it, right? They just pretend they can't because they don't want to face a hard conversation, or they feel like that they could only address it if they have a solution. No, you're not there to be. You don't have to have a solution to have the conversation. Or the other is, unfortunately, some people approach it the way you just described it, and it always comes across as an attack, labeling it. When they really don't have the right, or they don't understand to be able to do that. I think where I'm at is I've kind of said, hey, this is what I've noticed, and it's concerning, kind of similar to what you're saying, multiple times, but I'm just not getting a response. And then that's where I feel a bit stuck, and it scares me a little bit, because I've had friends that have taken their own lives in the past, and I've seen a similar pattern along the way, and it's like at what point do I take myself out of the picture or push further?
I think the patience is one thing, but if you are, the other thing that can be helpful is helping people with that clear next step. So, and that next step might not include you. Next step might be, doing something different, seeing someone else, going somewhere. But that clear next step is helpful as well. And if you can kind of, be with that person to help them even try out that next step, or at least offer it. That's great. Like in workplaces, sometimes the next step that's shown is, this is the number for the EAP, or this is how you access. And then you can take yourself, somewhat out of it. And I say somewhat because you don't ever want to stop showing that you care.
Yeah, of course.
You don't want it to come across as like, I've done my job.
Here's the phone number. Good luck. Yeah, exactly. You definitely can't do that. Listen, Paula, I could talk to you all day long. So much for taking the time out. I think obviously the work that you do is literally changes people's lives, literally, right? Which is why I was excited to have you on the show, and I can see it in your passion for what you do. There's a very clear sense of purpose and mission. So thank you for all the work that you do, and I wish you all the best until we next speak.
Oh, very much likewise. It's a pleasure speaking with you.